Well, those visuals on your screen are from the G20 leaders at Rajghat earlier this morning, paying homage to Mahatma Gandhi. We now have with us guests joining in: Karan Raj Chaudhary, Advisor of Strategic Initiatives at UNDP, Rahul Chabra, the former Secretary of Ministry of External Affairs, and Nilaya Verma, the co-founder and CEO of Primus Partners. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time here. Help us understand what your biggest takeaways were. Karan Raj, let's start with you there.
Thanks, Ritu. I think, first and foremost, when we talk about the sort of wins and the outcomes from the India G20 presidency, maybe three things to quickly highlight. One, consensus and adoption itself of the Delhi Declaration. Enormous success, particularly at a time of such geopolitical fragmentation, and sort of reflects the fact that India has, carefully cultivated relationships across the board. So that's certainly one point. And this has been arrived at after weeks of negotiation, not just at the Sherpa and the finance deputies meetings, but also the incredible groundwork that's been laid as part of the various ministerial working groups that we've seen, and outcome documents and chair summaries that we've seen emerge over the last couple of months. So that's one. The second is the substance of the declaration itself. That while consensus is essential, you can also achieve consensus by diluting and caveating the substance to an extent where it is perhaps meaningless. But that is not the case with the Delhi Declaration. You have 5 clear areas where there is a fair bit of progress that has been made in terms of inclusive growth, accelerating progress on the SDGs, the Green Development Pact. How do you prepare and equip multilateral institutions for the 21st century? And how do you reinvigorate multilateralism? And finally, maybe just one third point, if I could make, is around inclusion. That this presidency has been one that is ambitious, but certainly extremely inclusive. Right from the time when the agenda of the presidency itself was being shaped up, in early 2022, there were wide sets of consultations, including with UNDP and our teams, both regionally and globally. There have been 200 meetings in 60 cities, which has really democratized the G20 process to make it, as the Prime Minister said, a people's G20. The Voices of the Global South Summit at the start of 23 with 120 plus countries. And the fact that India is looking perhaps not to be a leader of the Global South, but is really looking to be a leading voice of the Global South. And of course, as we started out the summit yesterday, the proposal and the incorporation of the African Union as a permanent member of the G20 corrects a historical imbalance. And the entry will make the G20 more representative, inclusive, and therefore more influential in the process.
As G20 is now G21, but gentlemen, hold your thoughts. Let's right now go across to the Bharat Mandapam at the G20 venue where our team is stationed, and Parikshit, my co-anchor, is standing by. Parikshit, hi, how is day one? Recap that for us first.
Well, day one was full of surprises. There was a lot of speculation since morning whether there will be a communique or not by afternoon. It was clear that India was moving towards consensus. And finally, at 3 o'clock, we had this announcement from the Ministry of External Affairs that there will be a presidency press conference at 4 p.m. And then the Prime Minister thumped the table and congratulated everyone for reaching consensus. So it was indeed a celebratory mood here at the Bharat Mandapam, and a historic day indeed. India achieving consensus on all paragraphs in the Delhi Declaration. Yes, in fact, we were just listening to a European Union briefing, and an EU official said that there was no consensus till the last moment. It really went down till the wire. It was a difficult negotiation, but they managed consensus, and all the key outcomes that the world was looking for on debt restructuring, on cryptocurrency regulations, on MDB reform, sustainable development goals, all of that was achieved, and the G20 process succeeded in the end. The addition of African Union, as you said, was important, was very important, Ritu, because India had been pushing for that, and many of the problems related to debt that we're talking about. Ghana, Zambia, Chad, Ethiopia, all of them are dealing with Africa for that matter. So it was important to have African Union on the table. The other big deliverable that we must speak about is the infrastructure corridor deal that was announced on the sidelines between India, United States, Europe, UAE and Saudi Arabia. This rail and ship corridor will be very critical and will be a counter to the Belt and Road Initiative. A lot will be said about it, and it's not just a statement of intent. If you look at the White House release, it says that within 60 days, leaders from these countries, their representatives, officials will meet to start implementing this on the ground. So there is really a strong intention to begin work on this as soon as possible. So that was one important point. How did India achieve consensus? Well, we know about the positions taken by Russia and China. They were playing very tough in the room. We heard that the negotiations were ruthless, in order to quote Amitabh Kant. But finally, we're told that it was some of the emerging economies like Indonesia, South Africa, Brazil, which actually helped India to convince the G7. A notable role here played by President Biden as well. It seems that United States had a role in convincing the G7. Aside from that, today you had all the big leaders visiting Rajghat. The presidency will be handed over to Brazil around noon, and then you'll have a presidency press conference as well. I think there would be some surprises today as well that we may see. But Ritu, if I may put one question to Ambassador Rahul Chhabra. Ambassador Chhabra, I'd like to ask you about the infrastructure corridor deal that was announced on the sidelines. Give us the larger significance of this and the fact that the leaders are going to sit down in the next 60 days to start working on operationalizing this deal. What does this really say?
Morning, Parikshit. Morning, Ritu. Thank you for having me on your show. It's really a very significant, this deal. I mean, it couldn't get bigger than this. A deal linking India through the Middle East, right all the way to Europe. So as Ritu mentioned in the beginning, maybe it could be seen as an alternative to the BRI. So therefore, people will get to see there are different models available. Like India itself as a democracy has presented itself as a model of high growth with a democratic framework. So it is an option available to the rest of the world. So, I mean, we don't have to sort of tom-tom it too much, but it is obvious. So similarly, this sort of an option available, because until now, there was really no option available. People were sort of going along with whatever was on the table, and there was no other option. Yesterday, this deal was announced, and I'm happy to hear from you that in 60 days, there's going to be this big meeting again of all the top officials, because operationalizing this, seeing where the funding is going to come from, how is it going to actually work out, is the important aspect now. So it's really a game changer in this part of in pretty much globally, because this is also going to give a sort of set the benchmark and set a sort of example to other deals. They're already talking about the Trans-African Corridor, the railway and road link there, connecting the east and the western coast of Africa. So, I mean, if this model works well and is operationalized, it could easily set the template for other such transport corridors, connectivity, which is really the important part in the future growth of the world economy.
Right. Nilay Verma, if I were to come to you, the signatories to this corridor deal include Italy, France, Germany, India, US, UAE and Saudi Arabia. It will include a railway that upon completion will provide a reliable and cost-effective cross-border ship-to-rail transit network to supplement existing maritime and road transport rules, enabling goods and services to transit to and from India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel and Europe. Of course, this will have far-reaching consequences. What kind of economic potential can this infrastructure deal bring to all these economies, according to you? Nilay Verma.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the show. Absolutely right. I mean, look, end of the day, basic and core infrastructure in transportation is core infrastructure, is critical for economic growth. We also need to recognize that India today is the largest market for railway. We have the budgetary estimates, not just in India, but the steps that the Indian government has taken to develop in-house capabilities, including manufacturing capabilities, are immense. So this announcement to me is not just important from a geopolitical perspective, but from an Indian economy perspective as well, because I think we're going to play a major role in this development. If I can just go back and talk about a couple of other things which to me are very significant, besides obviously the headline of the declaration that we achieved, the fact that we have a consensus, we have become the voice of Global South. I just want to pick up 3 or 4 other points which I believe is reflective of how India's G20 presidency is going to impact the next 5 or 10 years. I want to talk about 3 things in particular. One is on SDG. I think, the declaration does recognize the fact that we're only 12% done, and we need to have much more significant financing into SDG. I know, Karan, you're there and UNDP is playing a critical role, but it has implications for India and also for the Global South. And I'm glad that we are focusing on that. The next area that really I want to call out is healthcare. We don't talk enough about it. I think in the last, especially because of pandemic, we've had 2 platforms that India has developed, whether it is including CoWIN. I think the Global Digital Health Initiative, which is going to be spearheaded by WHO, but India will play a very critical role. Equally important, I think, in healthcare is the fact that One Health and the fact that climate and health has been brought together. I do believe these are foundational changes to the way G20 is going to work, and in fact, the global economy has to react to. Again, India will play a very important role. And finally, if I can bring in the third point, I think as part of the New Delhi G20 presidency, we're also talking about the action plan for lifestyle for sustainable development. I think it is extremely important because end of the day, climate and climate change is center of all discussion. And again, this is something that India's contribution to the entire conversation in the global economic conversation.
All right, Karan Raj, to take that forward, Sustainable Development Goals, of course, that's been one of the big, talk points here as well, climate action, climate financing, and the clean energy push. Karan Raj, if you could tell us about the significance of that. Now, India's announced a global, biofuel alliance, with the US and Brazil as founding members. How significant is that going to be?
Thanks, Ritu. I think in the, just starting out with putting it in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals and where we are at, as you know, we're at the halfway point of the SDG agenda this year with 12 of 169 targets that are currently on track. A focus of the presidency in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals has also been around just energy transitions. It's been in the context of climate change and climate finance. And I think in that lens, the Global Biofuel Alliance assumes a sort of greater significance. Because here what we are really looking to do is create, together with Brazil and the US, encourage biofuel trade, develop concrete policies, provide capacity building support, and also promote technical assistance for national biofuel programming worldwide. And I think the idea there is essentially around how do we sort of transition from a pure fossil fuel-based economy to one that is becoming, embracing biofuels, embracing hydrogen, and so on.
Okay, we'll continue that conversation, but before that, if we could get you excerpts from a conversation that my colleague Pareen.
Right, welcome back to our special coverage of the G20. We are joining you from the Bharat Mandapam, the International Media Center is where I am standing. And just to speak about this media center once again, let's tell you that this is a 30,000 square feet media center that has been created here for the G20. There are more than 2,000 journalists who are moving around here who've come from all over the world to cover the G20 summit, which is now nearing its conclusion. Ambassador Rahul Chhabra continues to be with us. So is Karan Raj Chaudhary of the UNDP and Nilay Verma of Primus Partners. Ambassador Chhabra, I were to ask you about multilateral development bank reform. There were reports which had been prepared and submitted before G20 leaders. They've committed themselves to bigger, better MDBs for the future with more financing capabilities, a capital adequacy framework which would instill at least $200 billion of additional funding capacity for MDBs till the next few years. Do you think we have taken some steps forward on MDB reform, which was so essential to be ready for future crises, future pandemics? When it comes to implementation of these reform measures that have been spoken about, that have been endorsed in this report, how will that implementation now take place, Ambassador Chhabra?
That's where the proof of the pudding lies in the eating. I mean, the commitments have been made, hopefully all in good faith. But these commitments, as you recollect, commitments for climate finance, the $100 billion, the famous $100 billion that we never got to see annually. So we hope this doesn't go down that way. So we should be positive and think that this time they're being made in all sincerity. There's no reason to doubt that. So it is a step forward, but really it is now in the nitty-gritty and the implementation of it that we'll have to see. Also, I just wanted to add that this multi-level MDB financing or additional financing is just a little bit of what is required. It's not billions of dollars now, as we saw, it's trillions of dollars that's required. And this is, as the World Bank has been saying, is probably to be used as seed capital to galvanize private sector funding and get them on board. So, because that is where actually the initiative will be, and that's where the funds are. But it seems there is some sort of lack of bankable projects that are really not available. So all this entire sort of ecosystem will have to be put in place before we can really start seeing concrete benefits of these sort of announcements.
Okay, we're running out of time. So Nilaya, just a final word. You know, a lot has been achieved through this New Delhi declaration that has now been adopted. Your final thoughts on where India needs to walk the talk? What have been the most impactful, sort of outcomes to come out of this?
I think there are a number of impactful, but I think the timing is perfect. I think, with Brazil taking over the presidency, followed by South Africa, I think we've been able to raise the critical issues for the global South, whether it is in respect of jobs, education, healthcare, SDG financing, cities of the future. I think, we need to build on that. And the fact that Brazil is following up India's presidency, and many of their initiatives or priorities are very well aligned to us. I would also want to highlight a quick point here, which is about the green hydrogen. While we spoke about the biofuels, I think the fact that the Green Hydrogen Innovation Center is going to be part of ISA, and ISA is perhaps the only international organization to be headquartered in India. I think India can play a major role in that space as well. And my final word would be the fact that India has once again reaffirmed its commitment towards climate and climate financing. I think those are very critical areas that we need to take forward in the next couple of years.
Sure. Okay, on that note, Nilay Verma, Ambassador Chhabra, Karan Raj Chaudhary and Parikshit, thank you all for joining us here and sharing your thoughts. On that note, it's a goodbye and thank you for watching.